Here's what this street looked like back in 2009. I begin the video just east of downtown. This will be video 28 in my Detroit series where I go through the entire city. And it's also the last Detroit video within the series. At this point, generally speaking, I've driven through and have seen the entire city, and so have you, if you've been following along. We'll be seeing both the Rivertown district and Belle Isle in this video. You know, I'll start by saying this. Anytime a YouTuber uploads a video showing all of the abandoned houses and other bad neighborhoods in Detroit, the comment section fills up with people saying,
"Why don't you show the good things about Detroit? Detroit has good things too, like Belle Isle, downtown, Corktown, Indian Village, Boston Edison, Palmer Woods, University District."
And it's because the media has made storylines year after year, decade after decade, about how bad Detroit is without mentioning the good things that are presently going on in the city. But that's because there's so much abandoned stuff. You see more abandoned stuff here than you see pretty much anywhere else in this country. Another reason why the local Detroit prideful might get upset is because the wealth of history that Detroit has barely ever gets mentioned in comparison to all of the bad things about the city. And the wealth of Detroit's history matches up pretty well against any other large American city. Well, in this video series, you've seen both the good and the bad when it comes to both the modern-day Detroit and the city's history. Well, this video will show more of the good. Even though parts of Rivertown have a long way to go, it's still nice to see some newer construction, some nice places to eat, and a riverfront that's full of activity. Although where we are right now, the Rivertown warehouse district, where most of these warehouses are empty, it looks like a Grand Theft Auto map. But anyway, yes, Belle Isle, which is a city park, actually it's a state park because it's owned and operated by the state of Michigan now as of February 2014, and the park has seen drastic improvements once the state took over. But anyway, whatever the heck kind of park Belle Isle is, it's definitely an underrated park, that's for sure. You know, it doesn't get talked about much on a national scale at all. You know, Chicago has Grant Park and Millennium Park. New York has Central Park. St. Louis has a nice park system. Forest Park, yeah, that's all good and dandy, I guess. And you have Washington, D.C. with a couple of malls that look all pretty and fancy, but other cities have some really nicely designed and landscaped parks that complement the city that they're in. And Belle Isle should be a park that gets recognized at the same level, but for whatever reason it doesn't. And later in this video, you'll see what I mean. So yes, Rivertown is where we are currently, and despite seeing a bunch of abandoned warehouses and empty lots, this is actually considered to be one of Detroit's nicer areas these days. Rivertown is the latest neighborhood in Detroit to see some positive growth. Some people call it gentrification, but no. This is a good thing for the city. Come on, people. Stop acting so crazy. Plus, who knows? Maybe some big shot will buy up all of these buildings and renovate them and build something new within the next 10 years. It's not crazy to assume that because Rivertown has slowly started to capture the momentum happening in downtown and some of the other surrounding neighborhoods. And just like with downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods, living in Rivertown is going to cost you some coin, whether you're renting or buying a house or condo.
See? You just said it. It's going to cost money. Building expensive luxury condos in an otherwise poor neighborhood is the definition of gentrification. Where are all of the poor people going to go? We want new housing too.
Well, sorry, but, you know, historically speaking, people who have been living in poverty and who are not as wealthy as others, people who are otherwise poor, don't often live in newer housing because newer housing has always been more expensive because, oh, I don't know, it's new. And the fact that these luxury condos and apartments are being built in the Detroit city limits instead of a suburb like Royal Oak, Novi, or Troy is a great thing for Detroit. Plus, many of these newer residential developments in the city have been required to offer a certain percentage of their units to fit the requirements of affordable housing, like this new development here, Lafayette West. Look, you can't have your cake and eat it too, people, unless you want all levels of government to fail by giving unlimited handouts to everyone like they did back in 2020. I'm someone that grew up poor, and for much of my adult life, I haven't necessarily been swimming in cash. So I've lived that life. I get it. Luxury living is going to cost you though, and in order to afford it, you need a solid income. You can't expect to afford a brand new Cadillac while working as a janitor. That's why there are many other cheaper, yet less luxurious cars to choose from. Going back to seeing newer developments in and around downtown Detroit, a lot of this land was sitting here mostly being unused anyway, and a lot of these abandoned properties have been owned by individuals or companies from out of town that haven't been paying their taxes to the city. Points being, it's better if the property inside of the city limits is being put to use, and there's a demand for people to want to come and live in and near downtown Detroit, and even better if people from all over the region want to come to downtown, hang out, and explore all of the exciting new stuff. And after a lifetime of seeing Detroit decline and do everything wrong, it's refreshing to see Detroit finally do something right, which is make their downtown more attractive and make people want to move there. So if you can afford it, and if you're dying to live somewhere within the Detroit city limits, then great, because Rivertown has great access to the best amenities that Detroit has to offer, with downtown and Belle Isle being both close by. Meijer has just invested in a small store along Jefferson Avenue as well, and that's a big deal for the city because the Rivertown location is Meijer's third store inside of the massive Detroit city limits. 10 years ago, there were 0, and to give this more context, there's not a single Walmart, Kroger, or a Target within the Detroit city limits. And when it comes to these large department store chains that supply daily needs, I'm pretty sure that it's the 3 Meijer stores, 1 Home Depot, and a Whole Foods, and that's about it. Anyway, I talk more about Detroit being a food desert in a separate video within my Detroit playlist, and the link for that is down below, so make sure to check that out. Anyway, Rivertown is also in close proximity to Eastern Market, where you can enjoy a larger selection of fresh foods and places to go out to eat. Last but not least, Rivertown is located along the Detroit River, and along the Detroit River is the Detroit International Riverwalk, which has been rated as the best riverwalk in the country for 3 straight years. That's right, San Antonio, Texas. Detroit, Michigan is better than you, and there's nothing that you can do. At least, Detroit is better when it comes to river walking, if that's a word. And to be honest, not much else. Well, anyway, the Riverwalk spans from the Belle Isle Bridge through Rivertown and downtown before ending west of downtown, and it provides great recreation for all of the city snobs that either buy up or rent out the expensive condos along its path. Now, to understand an area, you have to know its history, and historically, Rivertown has been a heavily industrialized area of town. It's also one of the oldest areas of town, which makes sense as it's right along the Detroit River. There's been a lot of factories and warehouses in the long narrow strip between Jefferson Avenue and the Detroit River, if you couldn't tell by driving around and looking, and you definitely get a blue-collar feel when driving through. Early on, before the auto industry took off, Detroit was a big shipbuilding community, and many of the immigrants would work at the shipyard in Rivertown. The Detroit Dry Dock Company, later known as the Detroit Shipbuilding Company, built steam engines for large ships, and the company employed as many as 600 in 1890. This was a good foundation for a city that was about to become the Motor City. Detroit relied heavily on blue-collar work and immigrants from the start for its growth. They say that in 1910, that as many as 3 out of 4 people in Detroit were either immigrants or children of immigrants. Ancestry ranged from many different countries, such as Germany, England, Ireland, Canada, Russia, Poland, and others. And from 1910 to 1930, the immigrant population tripled in size. Really quick, as I couldn't help but show you this, as currently we're heading west on Franklin Street, just past Orleans, and here's what this street looked like back in 2009. Quite the drastic change, I would say. And people want to complain about how this is gentrification and how this is a bad thing, and to that I would say, why is this a bad thing exactly? Come again? This is actually quite amazing. People are crazy, aren't they? Detroit started to decline sharply starting in the 1950s, and Rivertown was largely neglected for decades. Recently, however, Rivertown has seen a development spree. even though there's still a long way to go. However, the newer apartments and condos nicely complement the traditional blue-collar feel of the area. Honestly, the transformation that we're seeing here is really neat, and hopefully this continues to clear out all of the blight that's left, but we'll just have to wait and see how far this momentum will go. Speaking about the future momentum, we're about to turn right onto Atwater Street, and straight ahead, you can see the Renaissance Center, which is Detroit's tallest building. Detroit area billionaire Dan Gilbert has mentioned how he would like to eventually build some new skyscrapers east of the Renaissance Center along the Detroit riverfront. Now, that would be a cool addition to the Detroit skyline, but a lot of that talk happened before the pandemic, and since then, his company has scaled down 2 other skyscraper projects in Detroit. One of them being the Hudson site, which originally was supposed to be over 900 feet tall. Now it's supposed to be less than 700 feet. The other project being the Monroe Blocks, in which construction hasn't even started on it yet after the quote-unquote groundbreaking back in 2018. You know, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of decades from all of these rich jabronis such as Gilbert, Stephen Ross, who lives in Florida, and the Illiches, but only half of the announced projects ever get done, if that. Better than nothing, I guess. Anyway, Gilbert has largely been credited as the lead man with helping downtown Detroit's economic comeback, as it started when he brought over the headquarters of his company Quicken Loans, now called Rocket Mortgage, into downtown Detroit from the suburb of Livonia back in 2010. But you gotta give credit where credit is due, because at least Gilbert gets most of his projects done, even if he scales them back 2 years after announcing them. It's better than what the Illiches do, who propose an entire entertainment district called District Detroit that centers around the new Little Caesars Arena, Comerica Park, and Ford Field. That was proposed all the way back in 2016. However, most of the blocks that are supposed to have been developed by now either remain as abandoned buildings or parking lots, all owned by the Illiches. Olympia Entertainment, aka the Illiches, however, had an announcement right around the time of me uploading this particular video, which is late March of 2023. The announcement includes the Detroit City Council approving a tax break plan for a $1.5 billion development plan for the District Detroit. The Illich family is teaming up with Stephen Ross to invest in 10 buildings in the District Detroit, saying that there will be more than 100,000 square feet of retail space, 460 hotel rooms, and 700 residential units. Due to the credibility of these rich billionaires announcing plans to develop real estate in Detroit, however, all we can do is wait and see if anything happens, because at this point, Detroiters would be fools to get excited about any new developments until you start seeing support beams and construction cranes at the location of said developments. And earlier I was talking about the newest Meijer location in Detroit. We just passed it on the left, and when I drove through in July of 2021, the building was still being constructed. When it comes to the economic stats for Rivertown, the neighborhood today is home to just over 1,000 people, and you can expect that number to be much higher in the coming years. The median household income is $70,000 per year, and 78% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $241,000. So you can see with those numbers alone how the Rivertown neighborhood has been transforming into a popular spot for young professionals. When it comes to the crime rates, however, it's still Detroit, so it shouldn't be a surprise to see that the violent crime rate is over double the national average. The property crime rate, however, is not near as bad, so take those numbers as you will. Niche.com gives the public schools a D+ because it's still Detroit, so it's being served by Detroit Public Schools, which are some of the worst public schools in the country. And the Area Vibes livability score is 60 out of 100, citing crime, housing, employment, and schools as the biggest factors for the poor ranking. As you can see, traffic was very heavy, so I'm speeding up the video until we get to Belle Isle, but my thoughts on the economic stats that I just mentioned is that most people who are moving to Rivertown don't have kids and don't care about the public school rankings. The people that are moving here want a walkable community in an urban setting, they want to be close to their place of employment, and they want to be surrounded by entertainment options and recreational opportunities. Hold up, what do we got here? Surprised there wasn't more people doing that, honestly. I've seen some really crazy shit driving the streets of Detroit while filming for all of these videos within this Detroit series. Well, anyway, since Detroit isn't a year-round warm weather climate, it's going to have to rely on the economy to grow, and the best way to grow the economy is to attract businesses, because without jobs, people aren't going to move to a city like Detroit. People are definitely not retiring here, they want somewhere warmer. But if Detroit and the rest of the metro area can collectively offer affordable living and higher than average paying jobs, if Michigan as a whole can keep their graduates from Michigan State and the University of Michigan, some of the better public universities in the country, and if things can stay that way for a long period of time, then that would be exactly what this region needs. You know, it is possible for metro areas in cold climates to grow these days, so saying that people are moving away because the weather is cold is a lame excuse. We saw it with Minneapolis and St. Paul for about a 2-decade stretch until the pandemic happened, and now everybody is leaving because of the higher taxes that have been implemented in Minnesota and because people started to light their city on fire. For that, I can say that I'm proud of Detroit for keeping the protests peaceful. Detroit was one of the few cities that protested in 2020 that didn't see extreme amounts of violence. Anyway, back to the economy, you can forget about bringing back the same level of manufacturing jobs in the auto industry that the region once saw, because that is never going to happen. At the same time, the auto industry is going to continue to be dominant in Detroit's economy for the rest of our lifetimes, just not in the same way. These days, despite the recent layoffs, the type of jobs that bring growth with it would be jobs in the tech industry. So if Detroit can get some of the tech companies to relocate here that are leaving California a part of their mass exodus, then that would help things out tremendously in Detroit and for the state of Michigan. But like I keep saying, all we can do is wait and see what happens and see how long this transformation of downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods continues. If it comes to an end, if it continues, we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, so time to switch gears now, as this is Belle Isle. This park is always popular during the nice days in the summer. Not only do people flock here from all around the city, but people will come here from the suburbs too. So yes, you can expect a large crowd if you decide to visit Belle Isle when the weather is nice. The reasons why so many people come to Belle Isle vary, as the island offers great views of the Detroit skyline over the river. You also have beautiful fountains, you have open green space to enjoy the outdoors, people like to bring their bikes and take laps around the island, there's an aquarium here along with some beautiful gardens, there's hiking trails on the east end of the island, and from there you can see a historic lighthouse. So there's many things to do and see on Belle Isle, and for some people, coming here on a nice, warm summer day never gets old. The French who first settled on what we know today as Belle Isle originally called it Hog Island, as they had pig farms here. In 1879, the city of Detroit bought Belle Isle from the Campo family, the same family that one of the area's main thoroughfares, Joseph Campo Street, is named after. During the following year, in 1880, Detroit opened the island to the public as a city park and called it Belle Isle, which is French for beautiful island. At 982 acres, it's the largest city island park in the United States. More history about the park is that in the 1880s, it was designed by landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted is referred to as the founder of American landscape architecture, as he's known for designing New York Central Park, the Emerald Necklace in Los Angeles, the park that surrounds Niagara Falls, and other parks throughout the country. The city of Detroit paid Olmsted $7,000 for designing the park, and you could say that he did a great job. One common theme throughout most of Olmsted's designs is that his parks included 3 zones, those zones being a formal zone, an active zone, and a natural zone, which you can see with Belle Isle. The formal zone being the front third of the island that's closest to downtown, the active zone being the middle portion of the island, and the natural zone being the far eastern end of the island. As I talked about earlier in the video, today you could say that Belle Isle technically is a state park rather than a city park, because in 2013, Michigan signed a 30-year lease to fund the maintenance of the park. Before that, Belle Isle was falling apart fast, as Detroit wasn't doing their part to pay for the park's maintenance. Since 2013, however, Belle Isle has seen major improvements. Facilities have reopened, which offers visitors more amenities to enjoy rather than just going over to Sunset Point and staring at the skyline. To the left is one of the park amenities that has seen better upkeep since the state took over. The James Scott Memorial Fountain is sometimes called the Jewel of Belle Isle. James Scott was a wealthy real estate entrepreneur who received most of his money from his father, as his father was way more successful than James ever was. In fact, James Scott hardly ever worked. He's described by HistoricDetroit.org as being an all-around man who often gambled his father's money away and spent most of his time being lazy, eccentric, and a bachelor. When he passed away in 1910, he left a sizable donation for the city, but the deal was that in order for the city to accept his gift, they had to erect a life-size statue of him. So that's how the James Scott Memorial Fountain came to be. It was controversial, and many people had a problem with the city honoring a guy with what was considered as low morals, but eventually Detroit accepted the deal. The city gave the design job to Cass Gilbert, who also designed the Detroit Public Library and the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. The marble to build the fountain came from Vermont, and 15 years after Scott's death, in 1925, the fountain was completed with a bronze statue of James Scott himself sitting in a chair while staring at the fountain. No swimming in the James Scott Fountain, people. We'll have you arrested real quick. Looks like Mr. James Scott got his wish. He gets to sit here for eternity. The late 1800s Charlie Sheen of Detroit, Michigan. Straight ahead you can see Windsor, Ontario, but for now we're going to continue to take a lap around the island. The building that we see here on the left is the Belle Isle Casino. This was one of the first amenities on the island as it first opened in 1887. Despite the name, there wasn't any gambling at this casino, as originally, the meaning of the word casino meant a building or a place that was used for meetings, entertainment, and dancing. The original building for the Belle Isle Casino was made of wood, and it didn't last very long, so the newer building that is still standing today was opened in May of 1908, and the first building was demolished shortly after. Another thing to know about Belle Isle is that the water table is really high, so Belle Isle has several lakes and several ponds that were designed to keep the water in certain spots. It's also very common to see flooding across the roads and in the grass when the area has seen a lot of rain. Before the park was built here, much of the island was natural wetlands, and the back half of the park is still that. To the right is the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, which has several historic Detroit artifacts on display and over 200 Great Lakes ship models. Looks like they have a boat on display inside there. And this is the museum. Cool. To the left here is the Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory, originally named the Belle Isle Conservatory. This was designed by the famed Detroit architect Albert Kahn, and it opened in 1904. In 1955, the conservatory was dedicated to Anna Scripps Whitcomb, who was the daughter of the founder of the Detroit News, James E. Scripps. Upon her death, however, she donated much of her art collection to the Detroit Institute of Arts, while her plants were donated to the conservatory. The statue up ahead is one of Alpheus Starkey Williams, who was a Union general in the Civil War. Williams was also a lawyer, judge, journalist, and a U.S. congressman. To the right here is what was originally the Belle Isle Zoo. Originally it opened in 1895, and it grew to be pretty large as it had about 150 animals at its peak. However, in 2002, Detroit's then mayor Kwame Kilpatrick closed the zoo for good. Here I was able to get some drone shots of the abandoned Belle Isle Zoo. So what you just saw there was what used to be the entrance to the Belle Isle Zoo, and this is what it looks like further on down. And it seems as if the drone is currently hovering above what used to be an animal exhibit, and you can see an elevated walkway that circles the exhibit. From here, we're going to go back to where we were on the loop as we continue our drive around Belle Isle. To the right is parking for the nature trails on the back end of Belle Isle. From here, you can hike to the William Livingstone Memorial Lighthouse, which was constructed in 1930. and it was designed by no one other than Albert Kahn. They say that it's the only lighthouse in the US that's made out of marble, which came from Georgia. The lighthouse helps guide ships coming in from Lake St. Clair as the waterway flows into the beginning of the Detroit River. So I came to Belle Isle a day after it was raining all day. So here's a good example of the water table being really high on Belle Isle. Anytime it rains like it did yesterday in Detroit, you can expect much of the island to be flooded. You can see this little sculpture right here. One World Under Michigan Stars. Southern Gateway of the Iron Bell Trail, eh? There you go. And it looks like the opening in the middle was designed so that the lighthouse could be seen straight through it. And before I end the video up ahead, we'll continue finishing our lap around Belle Isle. The last thing of note that I'll point out is the fact that the loop around Belle Isle that we just drove on has been a notable racetrack for the Detroit Grand Prix over the years. At least, a good portion of the loop has been. The Detroit Grand Prix began as a Formula One car race in 1982 with a racetrack made from the downtown streets that surround the Renaissance Center. In 1992, the race moved back to Belle Isle, where it stayed until 2001. While on Belle Isle, drivers complained about the poor quality of the track many times, saying that there wasn't enough room for passing in certain spots and that there were too many cracks, bumps, and potholes. It actually became known as being one of the worst and least popular racetracks on the schedule for many of the drivers. It's a shame because the scenery provides for an awesome backdrop. If only the city could have done something to maybe make the pavement along the path of the racetrack more appropriate for that style of driving. But they didn't. Well, in 2007, the Detroit Grand Prix returned to Belle Isle as a part of the IndyCar Series schedule, where it ran for only 2 years, as it was canceled in 2009. In 2012, however, the race came back once again to Belle Isle, this time staying all the way until 2022. This year for 2023, the race is leaving Belle Isle, and the Detroit Grand Prix will be back in downtown Detroit, so we'll just have to wait and see how that goes.
Heard this beat in my dream.
In this video, you saw the Rivertown district and Belle Isle. And that concludes my Detroit video series. All 28 videos are now done, and if you have been following along, you, just like me, have seen the entire city of Detroit. With that said, I'll end the video here. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also, make sure to hit that notification bell so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy checking out some of the featured playlists on this channel. Videos with amazing insights on other places like what you saw here can be found in my Detroit playlist or in my Michigan playlist. Last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can always go follow me on my other social media accounts, and those links are below. We'll see you next time. Peace!